They say that once, long before memory had a name, the earth still trembled beneath the footsteps of gods and men alike. And somewhere between the heavens and the sea, a child was born who would make even immortals remember what fear felt like. His name was Achilles. He was not meant to exist. Zeus himself had desired the sea goddess Thetis. So did Poseidon, lord of the deep. But an oracle spoke a truth that made even gods hesitate. The child of Thetis will be greater than his father. So the gods stepped back, afraid of creating their own undoing, and gave Thetis's hand instead to a mortal, Peleus, king of Phthia. It was a wedding of heaven and earth. The waves themselves rose to sing, and the mountains bowed in silence. Yet not all hearts rejoiced. The goddess of discord, Eris, was left uninvited. And vengeance has a way of slipping through locked doors. From her hands fell a single golden apple, inscribed, "To the fairest." And in that one shimmering act of spite, she set in motion the quarrel of goddesses that would one day ignite the Trojan War. But that was another story. For now, all eyes turned to the child, a boy whose veins carried both lightning and salt water. Thetis, fearing the prophecy, tried to steal destiny's weapon. Under the dark light of the underworld, she dipped her baby in the River Styx, its black waters whispering promises of immortality. She held him tight, by the heel, and where her fingers clutched his flesh, the river could not touch. That small place would remain mortal, a single heartbeat of humanity, hidden inside an almost god. As Achilles grew, the sea goddess knew she could not teach him to be mortal. So she sent him to the wise centaur Chiron, who taught the boy how to fight with strength, to heal with herbs, to sing with sorrow. Because even warriors must learn how to feel. Years passed, and destiny began to whisper louder. The world was stirring, the fires of Troy were waiting. Thetis heard the drums of fate long before her son did. She disguised him as a girl, hiding him among the daughters of King Lycomedes on the island of Skyros, a place where sea breeze carried secrets instead of screams. There Achilles found something the gods had never known: tenderness. Her name was Deidamia. Her eyes were summer, her laughter the sound of home. For the first time, the boy who was born for war forgot what war was. But love cannot silence fate. It only delays it. Odysseus came to Skyros, clever as always, bearing gifts for the maidens, silks, jewels, and a single sword and shield. When Achilles' hand reached for the weapon, the room fell silent. The masquerade was over. The gods had found their champion. When Thetis heard, she appeared to her son one last time, rising from the waves like a vision of sorrow and salt. She did not beg. She did not command. She only offered a choice. Two roads, carved by fate itself. One path, she said, will give you a long life, quiet and forgotten. The other will burn bright and end too soon, but your name will live as long as men draw breath. Achilles looked toward the horizon, where the sea met the sun, and smiled. If I must fade, he said, then let me fade like lightning. He chose glory, and with 50 ships and his loyal Myrmidons, he sailed to Troy, a storm made flesh. War welcomed him like an old friend. Spears shattered at his feet. Kings trembled at the sound of his name. But the greatest wars are not fought with swords. They're fought with pride. And pride, as every hero learns, is heavier than armor. Agamemnon, the high king, offended the gods and paid in plague. When Achilles demanded justice, Agamemnon answered not with apology, but with insult. He took from Achilles what he loved, Briseis, a captive woman who had become the warrior's fragile piece of peace. The camp fell silent. Achilles' rage could have ended nations, But instead of striking outward, he turned inward, withdrew from battle. Let the Greeks bleed, he thought. Let them learn my worth. And they did. Without him, the war turned to dust and despair. The Trojans surged. Their prince, Hector, drove the Greeks back to the very edge of the sea. Fires rose behind their ships, and the sky filled with the sound of dying names. Then came Patroclus, friend, brother, the half of Achilles' soul. He could not watch their comrades burn. "Let me wear your armor," he pleaded. "The sight of you is enough to turn fear to courage." Achilles hesitated, because somewhere in his heart a shadow whispered that this was the last time they'd speak. But he nodded, and Patroclus rode out in his name, a shining ghost of the hero who stayed behind. For a while the Greeks believed Achilles had returned. The Trojans fell back. Even Zeus paused to watch. But fate does not allow substitutions. Hector met Patroclus on the field, and with Apollo guiding his spear, struck him down. When the armor was torn away, Hector saw the truth, and the world held its breath. Back in the Greek camp, Achilles felt it before he was told. A silence fell upon him, the kind that comes before a storm that never ends. They said he screamed, a sound so raw that even the waves withdrew. He wept like a child, then rose like a god. "Bring me my armor," he said. But the old armor was gone. So Thetis rose again from the depths and begged Hephaestus, the divine smith, to forge her son a new one. When it was done, the armor glowed like captured sunlight, and Achilles shone with it. He was no longer fighting for glory. He was fighting for grief. When he returned to battle, the Trojans felt the earth itself move. He cut through men like wind through wheat. And when he found Hector, the two worlds collided. The duel was swift and merciless. Hector fought for his city. Achilles fought for his soul. And the gods watched in silence, because even they knew this was beyond them. When it ended, Hector lay still. Achilles, blind with fury, tied the body to his chariot and dragged it around the walls of Troy, dust and blood mingling under the setting sun. For 3 days he did this, until even rage began to feel like emptiness. And then, one night, a figure entered the Greek camp, old, trembling, cloaked in the dust of ruin. It was Priam, king of Troy, father of the man Achilles had slain. He fell to his knees before the warrior and kissed his hands, the same hands that had killed his son. "Remember your own father," the king whispered. "Have pity." The tent was silent. For the first time since Patroclus's death, Achilles saw not an enemy, but another man who had lost everything. The storm inside him broke. He wept and gently returned Hector's body. That night, 2 enemies shared their grief, and the gods themselves looked away, because they were witnessing something holier than victory, mercy. But fate, patient as ever, was waiting beyond the truce. Paris, the prince who had stolen Helen and begun this madness, took aim from the walls of Troy. Apollo guided his hand, for the god still held vengeance in his heart for the son who had once defied him. The arrow flew, spinning through smoke and sunlight, and found the one place untouched by the River Styx, the heel by which Thetis had held her son. Achilles staggered. The world seemed to slow. He touched his heel, felt the warmth of his own blood, and almost smiled. It wasn't anger that filled him, it was understanding. He sank to one knee, his armor heavy now, his breath shallow. Around him the battle roared on, but he no longer heard it. He looked toward the sea, toward the horizon, where his mother had once stood, and whispered, "Mother, you made me almost immortal, but I think it's better this way." They say the light faded from his eyes, like the setting of a sun that refused to die. The gods were silent. Even the wind held its breath. And in that stillness, the greatest warrior who ever lived crossed from man to myth. When news of his death reached the camp, men fell to their knees. The Greeks buried him with honor, and the sea carried his name across the world. Achilles, the flame that burned too bright for time to contain. But the story did not end with his body. It lived on in every soldier who ever chose courage over comfort. In every heart that dared to chase meaning instead of safety. Because that is what Achilles truly was. Not a god, not a monster, but a mirror held up to every human who ever wanted their life to matter. And perhaps that's why his legend never died. Because deep down, we all understand him. We all have a heel we try to hide. We all chase something that could destroy us. And sometimes we choose the fire anyway. So when you hear his name, don't think of a warrior's rage or a god's arrogance. Think of a man who looked destiny in the eye and said, "Then let me burn." Because greatness isn't about how long you live. It's about how deeply you leave your mark. And the mark of Achilles was written not in years, but in the hearts of those who still whisper his story beneath the same sky that once watched him rise.